For 42 years, I built a life within these walls. I laid the foundation, both literally and figuratively. This wasn't just a house. It was a living, breathing chronicle of my family. The faint pencil marks on the doorframe in the kitchen charting my son Mark's growth from a wobbly toddler to a lanky teenager. The slight discoloration on the hardwood floor where my wife, Clara, had her piano, the one she played every evening until the cancer made her fingers too weak. The familiar creak on the third step from the top, a sound that had signaled my return from work for decades, a sound that would send Mark and later his dog, Buster, scrambling to greet me. Every scuff, every mark was a sentence in the story of us. After Clara passed, the house felt cavernous, the silence a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was Mark who insisted I not sell. "This is your home, Dad," he'd said, his hand firm on my shoulder, a mirror of the way I used to comfort him. "It's full of Mom. It's full of us. You can't leave that." So I stayed. I became the keeper of the flame, the guardian of our history. When Mark married Sarah 3 years ago, I saw the way he looked at her, the same dizzying, all-consuming love I had felt for Clara. My heart swelled with a relief so profound it brought tears to my eyes. He had found his person. He was building his own story. They bought a lovely little bungalow across town, but this house remained the family's true north. Sundays were sacred. They were for my pot roast, the same recipe Clara had used, the smell of it filling the house, just as it had when Mark was a boy. Sarah would always bring a dessert, something elaborate and delicious, and we would spend the afternoon around the old oak table, the one I'd refinished with my father 50 years ago, talking and laughing. Sarah would tease me about my ancient taste in music, and I'd pretend to be offended. In those moments, the silence was banished. The house was alive again. I was the rock. That was my role. I was the one with the steady hands and the practical solutions. When their car broke down, I was the first call. When a pipe burst in their bungalow, I was there with my toolbox before the water had even been shut off. I was a constant, a fixed point in their universe. I thought it was the same for them and mine. Sarah would often hug me and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you, Dad." She started calling me Dad within 6 months of the wedding. It felt like a gift. The idea for the in-law suite was mine. A happy, practical solution. Their bungalow was getting cramped as they started talking about a family. My big, empty house was only going to get emptier. "Why don't you two move in here?" I proposed one Sunday. "There's more than enough room. We can convert the entire ground floor into a private apartment for you. You'll have your own entrance, your own space, and I get to have my family close." I saw the hesitation in Sarah's eyes, a fleeting shadow, but Mark had been ecstatic. "Are you serious, Dad? That would be amazing." The construction took 4 months. I oversaw every detail, ensuring the suite was perfect for them, modern, spacious, private. The day they moved in was one of the happiest of my later years. The house had a purpose again. The sound of their lives, their music, their arguments, their laughter, filtered up through the floorboards, and instead of feeling like an intrusion, it felt like a balm. It was the sound of the family continuing. I had my son back, and I had gained a daughter. I was, I believed, the luckiest old man alive. I was the rock, solid, dependable, unchanging. I thought my foundation was unshakable, built on a lifetime of love and mutual respect. I didn't know that a single tragic event could turn the rock into a burden, and the family I thought I was holding together could so easily decide that I was the one piece that no longer fit. I was about to learn that the title rock is only bestowed for as long as you are useful, and that grief can reshape landscapes, leaving even the most steadfast stones exposed and vulnerable. It was a Tuesday, a perfectly ordinary, overcast Tuesday. I remember because I was annoyed the laundry I'd hung on the line wouldn't dry properly. Sarah was at work. Mark had the day off. He'd popped his head into my part of the house that morning, a travel mug of coffee in his hand. "Hey, Dad, I'm heading out to run some errands. Need anything from the hardware store?" I was reading the paper at the kitchen table, the same table. "No, son, I'm all set. Don't forget we need to look at that dripping faucet in your bathroom tonight." He'd grinned, that easy, brilliant grin that was all his mother. "Wouldn't miss it. See you for dinner." He clapped me on the shoulder and left. I heard the familiar rumble of his truck starting in the driveway, then fading down the street. That was the last time I saw my son alive. The phone call came 3 hours later. It was a hospital, a polite, detached voice asking for Mr. Carter. There'd been an accident, a multi-car pileup on the interstate, a jackknife truck. The words were clinical, but they carried the force of a physical blow. Your son, Mark Carter, was involved. We need you to come to St. Jude's immediately. The drive was a blur of panic and desperate, silent bargaining with a God I hadn't spoken to since Claire's funeral. Please, not my boy. Take anything else. Take me. Just not my boy. The scene in the hospital was a brutal, familiar echo of a nightmare I'd already lived. The same harsh lighting, the same smell of antiseptic and dread. Sarah was already there, her face a mask of streaked mascara and utter devastation. We fell into each other's arms, two pillars holding up a collapsing sky. They won't let me see him, she sobbed into my shoulder. They said it's bad, Dad. It's really bad. We held onto each other in that sterile waiting room, our shared grief a fortress against the world. We were a family, bound together by our love for the same man. When the doctor finally came out, his face grave, his words slow and careful, the fortress was vaporized in an instant. I'm so sorry. We did everything we could. The internal injuries, it was too catastrophic. The world did not so much shatter as it simply ceased to exist. The sound that came from Sarah was one I had never heard from a human being, a raw, animal wail of pure agony. My own grief was a silent, internal implosion. My heart, my purpose, my future, all of it gone. The rock had been cracked right down the middle. The following days were a dark, shapeless haze. We moved through the motions like ghosts, planning the funeral, choosing a casket, enduring the endless stream of visitors and casseroles. Sarah and I clung to each other. We were adrift in the same ocean of loss, and we were each other's only life raft. She stayed in the in-law suite, and I stayed in my rooms upstairs, but the wall between us felt thin, permeable. We were united in our devastation. We ate silent meals together, too numb to taste the food. We sorted through Mark's things, holding up old t-shirts and photographs, weeping until we were hollow. I thought our shared grief would fuse us together permanently. I saw myself as her protector now, the last link to her husband, the keeper of his memory. I would be the rock for her, as I had always been for Mark. I told her, "This is your home, Sarah, for as long as you need it. We have each other." She had just nodded, her eyes vacant, and squeezed my hand. The first sign of the shift was subtle. A week after the funeral, I came downstairs to find a real estate brochure on the kitchen counter. It was for a modern, downtown condo. I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was looking for a friend. Then a few days later, I overheard her on the phone in her suite, her voice low but intense. I know, but he's just always there. I can't breathe. I need a fresh start. I can't do it here." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. He? Who was he? It had to be me. I was always there. The thought was a tiny, cold seed of fear, but I buried it. Grief makes people say things they don't mean. She was hurting. She needed space. I resolved to give it to her, to be less present, to stay in my part of the house more. But the distance grew. The invitations to watch a movie stopped. The shared meals ended. She started going out most evenings, coming home late. The house, which had been filled with a shared, heavy sorrow, was now filled with a new, tense silence. The life raft was drifting apart. I was losing my son all over again, and now, it seemed, I was losing my daughter too. I was still clinging to the title of the rock, but the foundation was crumbling beneath me. I just didn't know it yet. I was about to find out that the earthquake was only just beginning, and the aftershock would come in the form of an ultimatum that would tear the very roof from over my head. The tension in the house had become a physical presence, a thick, silent fog that filled the rooms and made every breath feel labored. For 2 weeks, I had tiptoed around my own home, a ghost in the narrative I once anchored. I kept to my upstairs quarters, my world shrinking to a bedroom, a small sitting room, and the kitchen for brief, furtive meals when I was sure Sarah was out or sequestered in her suite. The familiar creaks and sighs of the house now felt like accusations. The happy memories embedded in the walls seemed to mock me. I tried to bridge the gap. I left a note offering to fix the loose tile in her bathroom. She never mentioned it. I baked a batch of Mark's favorite oatmeal cookies, leaving a plate covered in plastic wrap on the counter that separated our spaces. The next day, the plate was washed and put away, the cookies untouched. Each small rejection was a pinprick, a slow bleed of my confidence. I was a man slowly being erased from his own life. The confrontation came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The sky was a sheet of dismal gray, and the rain tapped a monotonous, lonely rhythm against the windows. I was in the living room, attempting to read a book, but the words swam meaninglessly in front of my eyes. I was just staring at the cold, empty fireplace, thinking of all the winters we'd spent huddled before it, when I heard her footsteps on the stairs. This was unusual. She hadn't come upstairs to my part of the house in weeks. My body went rigid, a primal alertness tightening my muscles. She appeared in the doorway, not dressed for going out, but in jeans and a sweater, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was not streaked with tears anymore. It was set, resolved, hard. The grief had been sculpted into something else entirely, determination. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the warmth, the familiar dad that I had come to cherish. "Of course, Sarah," I said, closing my book and setting it aside. I gestured to the armchair opposite me. "Please, seat. Would you like some tea?" She ignored the offer and remained standing, a prosecutor poised before jury. "I can't do this anymore," she began, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere past my shoulder. "Living here, with you." The words landed like physical blows, each one knocking the air from my lungs. I don't understand," I stammered, the pathetic protest of a man who understood perfectly well. "This is our home. We're family. We're supposed to help each other through this." "Your home," she corrected, her eyes snapping to mine. There was a flash of something there. Impatience, maybe even anger. "This was always your home. Mark and I just lived in it. I live in a shrine to your life, your marriage, your son. Everywhere I look, it's Clara and Mark. There's no room for me. There's no room for my grief. I just see his ghost in every corner. And I see you, haunting the hallways, a constant reminder of everything I've lost." Haunting. The word cut deeper than any other. I wasn't a rock anymore. I was a ghost. A nuisance. A walking, talking monument to her pain. "Sarah, please," I said, my voice cracking with a desperation I despised. "We can change things. We can redecorate. We can put away some of the photos if it's too painful. This is a big house. We can find a way to give each other space." No, the word was final, absolute. "You don't get it. I don't want space. I want out. I need a clean break. A new start. And I can't have that with you here." She took a sharp breath, steeling herself for the final, killing stroke. "I want you to leave. I'm giving you a week to move out." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The rain outside was the only sound, a relentless, deafening roar. I stared at her, my mind refusing to process the sentence. Move out. From the house I built. From the home where I raised my son. From the only place I had left of Clara. You can't be serious," I whispered, the words ash in my mouth. "This is my house. I've lived here for 42 years. My name is on the deed." A cold, calculated look entered her eyes. It was the look of someone who had already consulted a playbook I didn't know existed. "The in-law suite," she said, her voice chillingly calm. "The one you were so proud of building for us. The one you signed over to us. When you did that, you made this house my primary residence. My legal residence. And as the sole inheritor of Mark's estate, that includes his property. This is my house now. Legally. And I'm asking you to leave." The world collapsed in on itself, silent and brutal. The construction. The conversion. The legal paperwork I'd signed so happily, so trustingly, seeing it only as a formality for my family. I had been so proud, so generous. I had handed her the weapon she was now using to eviscerate me. I was no longer a father, a grandfather figure, a rock. I was a tenant, an unwanted occupant, and I had just been served my notice. I couldn't speak. I could only look at the stranger standing in my living room, the woman my son had loved, and see the utter destruction of my world in her resolute eyes. The ultimatum hung in the air between us, a guillotine blade that had already fallen. I had 1 week. 1 week to pack up a lifetime. 1 week before I became homeless. The numbness was a mercy. It was a thick, insulating layer between my mind and the cataclysm that had just occurred. After Sarah delivered her ultimatum, she had simply turned and walked back downstairs, her footsteps echoing with a terrible finality. I remained in the armchair, a statue carved from shock and ice, listening to the rain until long after the sky darkened into night. The following morning, the numbness began to crack, and the reality of my situation seeped in, cold and vile. 1 week, 7 days to dismantle a life. The sheer logistical horror of it was paralyzing. 42 years of accumulation. Furniture, books, tools, memories, a universe of possessions that now had to be sorted, boxed, and exiled. Where'd it even go? A storage unit? A retirement home? The back of a dumpster? I couldn't face it. Not the big pieces. Not the furniture that held the imprints of our lives. I needed to start small, in a place that felt removed, a place where the memories were already archived. The attic. The pull-down ladder groaned in protest, a sound it had made since the day I installed it. The air that wafted down was hot, dry, and thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten things. I climbed up into the dim, triangular space, the single bare bulb casting long, dancing shadows among the shrouded shapes of our past. Christmas decorations, Clara's old sewing machine, Mark's college textbooks, a lifetime packed away in cardboard and dust. My goal was practical. Find old bank statements, tax records, anything that might prove my long-standing ownership of this house, any scrap of paper that could be a legal lifeline. I moved through the aisles of boxes, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, reading labels I'd written in a younger, more hopeful hand. Christmas ornaments, baby clothes, Clara's teaching materials. And then I saw it, tucked behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines, a box unlike the others. It wasn't a standard moving box, but a sturdy, wooden crate, the kind used for shipping fine china. There was no label. I didn't remember putting it here. A prickle of curiosity, the first feeling I'd had besides dread and despair, stirred within me. I dragged the crate into the circle of light beneath the bulb. It was heavy. I used a crowbar from my toolbox to pry the lid open, the nails screeching as they yielded. Inside, nestled in yellowed Excelsior packing, was not china. It was a time capsule, but one I had never assembled. On top lay a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Beneath them, a large, leather-bound photo album I'd never seen before. And at the very bottom, a small, locked metal strongbox. I picked up the letters first. The paper was brittle, the handwriting on the envelopes elegant and flowing, but unfamiliar. They were all addressed to Clara, and they were all stamped with a return address from a city over 200 miles away. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and pulled out the first letter. My dearest Clara, it began. The world fell away. The dust, the heat, the crushing weight of my eviction, it all vanished. I sat there on a dusty trunk, reading words written to my wife by a man named Thomas. Words of a deep, intimate, and desperate love. They spoke of a future they had planned, a future that was stolen. They spoke of child. I know the situation is impossible. One letter read, dated just a few months before I met Clara. Your family would never accept it. But we have our son, our beautiful boy. He has your eyes, my love. We must do what is best for him. The adoption is arranged. The family is good, stable. They can give him the life we cannot. It will be a clean break. For him. The words swam on the page. Our son. Adoption. My heart was a frantic trap burr in my chest. I dropped the letters as if they were on fire and grabbed the photo album. I opened it. The first page held a single, black and white photograph of a young Clara, more beautiful than I had ever seen her, holding a newborn baby. She was looking down at the child with a look of such raw, devastating love that it stole my breath. It was a look I recognized. It was the way she had looked at Mark. I fumbled for the strongbox. The lock was flimsy, meant for privacy, not security. A sharp blow from the crowbar shattered it. Inside, there were no stocks or bonds. There was a single, official-looking document. A birth certificate. Child mail. Name, Mark. Mother, Clara Evans. Father, Thomas Richardson. And, paper clipped to it, the final, devastating piece, the adoption certificate. Finalized a week after birth. The adoptive parents, Charles and Elizabeth Carter. My parents. The air left my lungs in a single, silent rush. I slumped back against a box, the documents spilling from my numb hands. Mark, my son. He wasn't my son. He was never my son. The entire foundation of my life, my identity as a father, a husband, the patriarch of this family, was a carefully constructed lie. Clara, the love of my life, had come to me heartbroken, carrying a secret so immense it had shaped our entire marriage. She had never been able to have children. I knew that. What I didn't know was that she had already had one and given him away. My parents, unable to have more children after me, had adopted him. They had given Clara a chance to be near him, to watch him grow, all while maintaining the charade. I thought of my parents' instant, unwavering affection for Clara. I thought of the way my mother had doted on Mark, a closeness that had sometimes felt different. It wasn't grandmotherly intuition. It was a mother's love for the grandson who was also, biologically, her son. The grief for my son was now joined by a new, profound grief for my wife, for the burden she had carried alone all those years. And then a new, cold, and terrifying thought crystallized in my mind. Sarah didn't know. She had married Mark, unaware of his true parentage. She had evicted me, believing this house and everything in it was rightfully hers through her husband. But if Mark was not my biological son, and the adoption was a closed, private matter within my own family, what were her legal rights now? The box in the attic had not just shattered my past. It had thrown a single, frayed lifeline into the wreckage of my present. I was no longer just a grieving father being cast out. I was a man with a secret, and that secret was now the only weapon I had. The documents felt like live wires in my hands, burning with a truth I still couldn't fully comprehend. I had carefully placed them back in a strongbox, the photo album and letters on top, and hidden the entire crate in the back of my bedroom closet. The attic was no longer safe. Sarah was downstairs, likely packing my future into boxes, while I was upstairs, clutching the nuclear secret that could obliterate hers. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the one who had handled my parents' estate, old Mr. Henderson. He was semi-retired, crusty, and had been a friend of my father's. If anyone knew about this, it would be him. I called his office from my cell phone, my voice a hoarse whisper, asking for an urgent, discreet appointment. His secretary, a woman who had probably worked for him since the typewriter era, slotted me in for that afternoon. I told Sarah I was on a look at storage units, another lie in the growing tapestry of deception that now defined our relationship. She merely nodded, her expression one of cool impatience. The clock was ticking. Henderson's office was a time capsule, smelling of lemon polish and old paper. The shelves were bowed with leather-bound legal volumes, and a green glass lamp cast a pool of warm light on his massive oak desk. He stood as I entered, a tall, stooped man with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. "John," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Sit down. You look like hell." "I feel like it, Bill," I said, sinking into the worn leather chair opposite him. I placed a strongbox on his desk. It seemed to suck all the light from the room. "I have a problem." I began, my throat tight. "A family problem." I started with the present. I told him about Mark's death, about Sarah, about the in-law suite conversion and the legal paperwork I'd signed, about the ultimatum. "She says the house is legally hers now, as Mark's heir. She's given me 1 week to get out." Bill listened, steepling his fingers, his expression neutral. When I finished, he gave a slow, weary nod. "It's a common story, John. A tragic one, but common. The surviving spouse often has superior rights, especially if they were legally established as a resident in the property. The suite conversion, that was a mistake. You essentially gave them a deeded interest, without Owl stating otherwise. He spread his hands. Her claim is strong, very strong. The finality in his voice was a death knell. I had been braced for it, but hearing it from a professional made it real, a concrete wall slamming down in front of me. But that's not all, I said, my voice dropping. I pushed the strongbox across the desk towards him. I found this in the attic yesterday. He looked from the box to my face, his sharp eyes narrowing. He didn't ask questions. He simply opened the lid. He put on a pair of reading glasses and carefully lifted out the contents. He read Thomas's love letters, his expression unreadable. He studied the photo of Clara and the baby, and then he picked up the birth certificate and the adoption papers. The silence in the room was profound. I watched his face, searching for a flicker of surprise, of recognition. There was none, only a deep, settled sadness. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "So," he said finally, his voice even quieter than before. "You know," the two words confirmed everything. The air left my lungs. "You knew? All this time, your father was my best friend, John," he said, not looking at me, but at the photograph of Clara. He and Elizabeth were devastated they couldn't have more children. When Clara's situation arose, it was a secret they swore to take to their graves. They loved that boy as their own. They loved Clara. They built this fiction to protect everyone. To protect everyone, I echoed, a hot spike of anger piercing my numbness. I lived my entire life in that fiction, Bill. I raised a son who wasn't mine. I loved a wife who lied to me for decades. Did she? He asked, his gaze finally meeting mine. Did she ever once tell you Mark was your biological child? Did your parents? I opened my mouth to retort and then stopped. I scour my memory. Clara had wept when the doctor told us she couldn't conceive. We had grieved together. We had applied for adoption agencies and been rejected. And then my parents had approached us. They knew of a young mother, they said, a distant relative on my mother's side who was in a difficult situation and wanted a private, closed adoption. We were overjoyed. We never asked questions. We never looked a gift horse in the mouth. The lie was not in the words spoken, but in the truth deliberately omitted. No, I whispered, the fight draining out of me. They never did. Clara carried that guilt every day of her life, Bill said softly. She wanted to tell you. So did your father. But I advised against. Leaving Bill Henderson's office was like stepping out of a war room and back into the blinding, mundane reality of a sunny afternoon. I held a manila folder containing crisp, notarized copies of the documents from the strongbox. They felt different now. No longer just artifacts of a shattered past. They were legal instruments. Weapons. The weight of them in my hand was both empowering and sickening. Bill's words echoed in my mind. You hold all the cards now, John. The question is, how do you want to play them? He had outlined a clear, brutal path. Serve Sarah with the documents and a cease and desist notice. Initiate formal eviction proceedings against her for the in-law suite. Take back what was legally mine. It was a clean, clinical, and utterly merciless strategy. But I couldn't go home yet. I couldn't face the house, the boxes, the oppressive silence. Not with this nuclear secret burning a hole in my briefcase. I needed to understand. The legal truth was now clear, but the human truth was a tangled, painful knot. I needed to talk to Clara. I drove to Oak Haven Cemetery, a place I visited less frequently than the house, but which now felt like the only sanctuary left. Clara's grave was under a young magnolia tree weed planted together, its leaves a glossy, vibrant green. I sat on the grass beside the smooth, gray headstone, tracing the letters of her name with my finger. Clara, I began, my voice rough in the quiet air. I found a box. The words hung between me and the stone. I told her everything. About Sarah's ultimatum. About my desperate search in the attic. About finding the letters, the photograph, the truth that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. I didn't speak with anger anymore. The drive from the lawyer's office had drained the rage away, leaving behind a vast, aching sorrow. Why, Clara? I whispered, the question I had been holding in for a day finally breaking free. Why didn't you trust me? And then, sitting there in the dappled shade, The memories began to shift and realign, viewed through the new, painful lens of the truth. I thought of her sometimes, especially in the early years of our marriage. A deep, profound melancholy that would settle over her for no reason I could discern. I put it down to her inability to have children. I tried to comfort her, to assure her that we would find another way. I remember the day my parents sat us down and proposed the adoption. Clara's reaction had been complex. There had been tears, of course, but also a strange, almost frantic anxiety. I had mistaken it for the fear of a prospective mother. I thought of her with Mark, the ferocity of her love. It had always been intense, sometimes bordering on desperate. She was endlessly patient with him, but she could also be fiercely, irrationally protective. If he scraped his knee, she would panic in a way that seemed disproportionate. I thought it was just a mother's love. Now, I saw it for what it was, the terror of a woman who had already lost one child. The pieces fell into place, forming a picture not of deception, but of profound, lifelong trauma. She hadn't kept the secret from me to be cruel. She had kept it because the act of giving up her firstborn son had been a wound so deep, so shameful in the context of her strict, traditional family, that she had walled it off entirely. My parents had offered her a miracle, a way to be in her son's life, to watch him grow, to love him, all while being spared the scandal and the constant, painful reminder of her mistake. The fiction was a cage, but it was also a shelter. She hadn't lied to me. She had hidden the most broken part of herself, the part that believed she was unworthy, that she had committed an unforgivable sin by giving her child away. The secret wasn't about Mark's paternity. It was about her own perceived failure as a mother, as a woman. She had let me believe a simpler, less painful story because the real one was too heavy for her to ever speak aloud. The anger I had felt in Bill's office melted away, replaced by a grief so immense it was almost peaceful. I hadn't been betrayed. I had been trusted with a broken woman, and I had spent my life loving her without ever knowing the true source of her fractures. I had failed her, not because I wasn't a good husband, but because I had never been able to see the ghost that haunted her. "Understand, my love," I said to the headstone, my eyes welling with tears for the first time since this nightmare began. They were not tears of self-pity, but of a long-delayed, shared grief. "I'm so sorry you had to carry that alone. All those years. I'm so sorry." The legal power Bill had given me felt cheap and tawdry in the face of this revelation. To use this secret as a weapon against Sarah would be to betray Clara all over again. It would be to take the most painful, hidden chapter of her life and wield it like a club to win a house. It would be to continue the cycle of secrecy and pain that had defined this family for generations. I looked at the manila folder lying on the grass. It represented a path of vengeance, of reclaiming what was mine. But sitting by my wife's grave, finally understanding the weight of the secret she had carried, I knew that path led nowhere I wanted to be. It would make me the rightful owner of a house, but it would forever make me a prisoner of the past. I had a choice. I could be the man who wielded the law like a hammer, who used a mother's deepest sorrow to make himself whole. Or I could be the man Clara had loved, the rock, the protector. Even now, especially now, that role had to mean something different. It couldn't be about holding on to stone and mortar. It had to be about breaking the cycle. I picked up the folder. I didn't open it. I simply held it. The power was still in my hands. But now, I knew I wouldn't use it the way Bill Henderson had intended. Clara's secret had not given me a weapon. It had given me a responsibility. The house felt different when I returned. It was no longer just my home under siege. It was a stage for the final act of a play that had begun decades before I ever climbed into that attic. The manila folder was in my hand, not as a shield or a sword, but as a key to a truth that could either lock us all in perpetual conflict or perhaps set us free. I could hear Sarah moving around in the in-law suite below, the sounds of packing tape being ripped from a roll, the shuffle of boxes. The clock was ticking down. 4 days left. I stood at the top of the stairs, my heart a steady, determined drum in my chest. The numbness was gone. The confusion was gone. In their place was a clarity born from a conversation with a headstone. I walked down the stairs, each step firm and deliberate. I didn't stop at the doorway to my part of the house. I walked right up to the door of the in-law suite, the door I had lovingly framed and hung myself. It was closed. I knocked. A moment of silence, then the door opened. Sarah stood there, dressed in old jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had been crying. Her eyes were puffy, her face pale. She looked young. She looked lost. The hard, resolute mask she had worn during her ultimatum was gone, replaced by the raw grief I recognized from the hospital waiting room. "John," she said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "If you're here to try and change my mind, don't." "I can't. I'm not," I said, my own voice calm, quieter than I expected. "I'm here to talk. As family. May I come in?" She hesitated, suspicion flickering in her red-rimmed eyes. But she stepped back, holding the door open. The suite was in disarray. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, some labeled kitchen, others marked study. His presence was everywhere, and yet his absence was a physical chill in the air. She didn't offer me a seat. We stood in the middle of the living room, two adversaries on a battlefield of half-packed memories. "I know why you're doing this," I began. She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture. "I told you why. I need a fresh start. I can't breathe here." "It's not just that," I said, holding her gaze. "It's because you're angry. You're angry at Mark for leaving you. You're angry at the world. And you're angry at me." Her chin trembled. "Why would I be angry at you?" "Because I'm still here," I said softly. "And he's not. Because every time you look at me, you see him. And because you think this house, my life with Clara, my memories, you think they're a competition for your grief. You think my pain is somehow less than yours because he was my son, not my husband." A single tear escaped and traced a path through the dust on her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She just stood there, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, saying nothing. My words had found their mark. "I'm not here to fight you for this house, Sarah," I continued, and I lifted the manila folder. "I'm here to give you the truth. All of it." I held it out to her. She looked at it as if it were a snake. "What is that?" "It's the reason you can't evict me," I said, my voice still gentle. "And it's the reason why you never should have had to." Slowly, warily, she took the folder. She opened it. I watched her face as she saw the birth certificate first. Her brow furrowed in confusion. Then her eyes scanned the adoption papers. I saw the moment of understanding dawn, the moment the math didn't add up, the moment the world she knew tilted. Her face went from pale to ashen. Her hands began to shake. What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "That's Clara's secret," I said. "And my parents. Mark wasn't my biological son. Clara had him before we met. My parents adopted him. They brought us together to raise him, to give Clara a chance to be near him. We all lived a beautiful, loving lie." She stared at the papers, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The legal implications were undoubtedly crashing down on her. Her claim to the house, eviscerated in an instant. But I could see the human implications were hitting her even harder. "He never knew," I said, answering the question I saw forming in her horrified eyes. "He died thinking I was his father, and I am, in every way that ever mattered. Biology is just paperwork." I gestured to the documents in her hand. "That's all this is. Paperwork." She sank onto the arm of the sofa, the folder falling into her lap. She looked up at me, her expression a maelstrom of shock, betrayal, and a dawning, terrible pity. "All this time, you never knew?" "I found that box in the attic 2 days ago," I said, "after you told me to leave. I was looking for my own old deeds." I paused, letting the weight of it settle. "My lawyer has copies, Sarah. He advised me to serve you with eviction papers, to take back what is legally, indisputably mine." The color drained completely from her face. She looked like a ghost. "But I'm not going to do that," I said. Her eyes, wide in shock, met mine. "This house, it's caused enough pain. It's been a vault of secrets for too long. Clara lived with this her whole life. I won't have us fighting over its bones." I took a step closer. "I don't want to be your landlord, and I don't want to be your enemy. I want to be your family. What's left of it?" I looked around the room, at the boxes, at the ghost of my son. "You were right. You do need a fresh start. This house is a tomb for you. It was for Clara, too, in a way she could never escape. I took a deep breath. So, here's my offer. We sell the house. We split the proceeds, 50-50. You take your half and you build a new life, somewhere that doesn't hurt to breathe. A life Mark would have wanted for you. She was crying openly now, silent tears streaming down her face. The confrontation was over. There were no more ultimatums. There was only the devastating, liberating truth and a choice. "And you?" she asked, her voice a broken whisper. I gave her a small, sad smile. "I'll find a small place, maybe by the water, and I'll fill it with the good memories, not the secrets." I left her then, sitting amidst the boxes, clutching the papers that had shattered her world but had, I hoped, given her a path out of the ruins. The confrontation was not a battle I had won. It was a wall we had finally, together, begun to tear down. The for sale sign went up 2 months later. It wasn't a surrender, but a sacrament. A final, deliberate act of laying down a burden that had become too heavy for any one person to carry. The process of preparing the house for sale was a long, slow exorcism. We did it together, Sarah and I. The initial raw shock of the truth had forged a fragile, new understanding between us. We were no longer adversaries fighting over an inheritance. We were fellow survivors, tasked with dismantling a monument to a complicated past. We started with the attic. We took the wooden crate, with its letters and its photographs and its painful secrets, and we brought it down into the light. We didn't burn it. That felt too much like anger, and we were both too tired for anger. Instead, we took an afternoon and went to Clara's grave. We spread a blanket, and we went through it piece by piece. Sarah cried for the young mother Clara had been, forced into an impossible choice. I cried for the husband who had never seen the full depth of his wife's sorrow. We shared stories, and for the first time we grieved not just for Mark, but for the entire, tangled history that had led us here. Then, we buried the crate in the far corner of the backyard, under the old oak tree Mark had loved to climb. We didn't mark it. Some truths are meant to return to the earth, not to be built upon. The rest of the house we approached with a gentle, determined ruthlessness. We held a massive estate sale, selling off furniture that held too many echoes. The old oak table, the site of so many Sunday pot roasts, was the hardest to let go. A young couple bought it, their hands intertwined as they marveled at the craftsmanship. They were starting their own family, their own story. Seeing it go to them felt right. It wasn't an ending, it was a passing of the torch. With the house stripped down to its bones, the memories that remained felt lighter, more focused. They were no longer oppressive ghosts in every room, but curated treasures we chose to keep. I packed a single box of photographs, the best of Clara, the best of Mark, a few of all of us together, smiling. Sarah did the same. We were not erasing the past. We were editing it, choosing the chapters we would carry forward. The closing was on a bright, crisp autumn day, much like the day Mark had died. It felt like the closing of Circle. Sarah and I sat side by side at a large, impersonal table in a title company office, signing the papers that would sever our last legal tie to the property. When it was done, the agent handed us each a check. It was a substantial sum, more money than I had ever held at one time, but it felt like paper. The real value was in the freedom it represented. Outside, we stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the house one last time. The new owners, a family with 2 small, laughing children, were already pulling into the driveway, their car packed with bikes and toys. "It looks happy," Sarah said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "It does," I agreed. She turned to me. "Where will you go, Dad?" The word Dad hit me with a force it never had before. It wasn't a title born of habit or obligation anymore. It was a choice. She was choosing to keep me. "I found a small cottage," I said, "on the lake. It has a dock and a guest room." I looked at her. "You'll always have a key." She hugged me then, a real tight, unburdened hug. "I'll visit. I promise." And I knew she would. She was moving to the city, using her share to start a small graphic design business, a dream she and Mark had always talked about. She was building her fresh start, and I would be a part of it, but from a healthy distance. We had learned that love doesn't have to mean living in each other's pockets or in each other's grief. My new home is quiet. The silence here is different. It's not the heavy, waiting silence of the old house. It's a peaceful, expansive silence, broken only by the lap of water against the shore and the call of the geese. My furniture is new, simple, and holds no ghosts. The photographs I brought are in frames on the mantelpiece, not covering every surface, but standing as proud, joyful reminders. I sit on the porch most evenings, watching the sun set over the water. I think of Clara, and I hope she's finally at peace, her secret laid to rest. I think of Mark, and the love remains sharp and sweet, no longer twisted by the lie of biology. He was my son. That is the only truth that ever mattered. The legacy of our family is no longer a deed to a house or a secret in a box. It's the hard-won understanding between a man and the woman his son loved. It's the promise of a guest room that will always be open. It's the knowledge that even after the worst storms, you can choose to build something new, something honest, something that lets the light in. The rock of the family was never a piece of property. It was the willingness to love, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And that was a foundation I could take with me anywhere.